Welcome to Parkside Podcast, Voices of Our Landscape. I'm Autumn Hawthorne, Executive Director of the Stroud Region Open Space and Recreation Commission. This series is all about the people and stories that shape the parks, trails, and public spaces in Monroe County and how those spaces shape us in return. Support our parks by becoming a member of the nonprofit Friends of Stroud Region Open Space and Recreation Commission. For more information, visit stroudrec.org/friends. Today, I'm sitting down with David Koster, someone whose story spans generations of connection to East Stroudsburg. David grew up here, moved away for a little while, and has since returned to the place that helped shape some of his earliest memories. His family also has a connection to one of the most significant events in our region's history, the flood of 1955. As we mark the 70th anniversary of that disaster this summer, David helps us reflect on how the community rebuilt, how the levee was born, and how the public spaces we enjoy today carry forward those stories. So welcome, David. Thank you for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's start at the beginning. What was East Stroudsburg like when you were a kid?
It was a small town, pretty close-knit, lots of kids. Although, don't get me wrong, we had divisions in terms of race and class and neighborhoods. But I think it still was a close-knit small town. And I'm going to tell you something that a lot of people don't know, which is I went to 6th grade at Jam Hill School. And my dad went to Jam Hill School, which was the junior high at the time. So that was a bit of an interesting connection. But in my time, when we were finishing 6th grade, at the end of the school year, we would get it in meetings with principals and teachers telling us what we had coming up. And from 6th grade, we moved into 7th grade in the high school building, which was junior, senior at the time.
Wow.
So we were there from 7th grade through 12th grade. So 6 years in one building, 6 years in any one place,
Yeah.
You get to know how things work, you get to know your way around, and just as importantly, people get to know you. And so I think about that as being the schools really being the fabric of the community, because we spent so much time together with the same kids, moving in the same places and having shared experiences, which I think is what really bonded a lot of the people together. Take that a step further, is that many of my friends' parents also grew up here, which means there was multiple generations of connections. And another aspect of that I think of, that some of the people that we interacted with that were 5 and 6 years older than us, who were role models, most of the time good role models, but if we would go to a football game or a baseball game and watch somebody play, and they were showing us how to do things, and we knew that they were not some distant person that we could never aspire to be. They were people that we would see every day and could have a conversation with and interact with. And another part of that is, I think about some of the families who had history here or had influence here. Maybe it was a doctor or a business owner or some leader in the community. We were in school with their kids or someone related to them. And so it was sort of a 2 or 3 degrees of separation to the whole community.
Yeah.
And I think that really is what pulled everybody together, because you just knew who everybody was and everybody knew you, and it was a close-knit whether you wanted it to be or not. And so I think that really gave the town its personality through that time. And of course, I know you've heard about the famous Turkey Day games.
Yes.
And when I say everybody was there, everybody was there. And again, it's just another shared experience that I think people that grew up here latch onto as one of the great things about growing up around here.
Besides the schools, were there any other parts of town that stand out in your memory?
Well, I grew up on East Brown Street, which is just down the street from the hospital, and we call it the block. So the block was East Brown to Prospect, mostly Center Street and Broadhead Avenue. And that was our domain. And there's a network of alleys that are still there, fields and garages and friends' houses. And so that was kind of our domain. And we just ran that little block and played games. And we had a field there where we played football and baseball. And so that was kind of the center of our lives. And then when we got a little bit bigger and sort of outgrew that space, we would spend a lot of time up at the college, ESU. It was East Stroudsburg State College then. Okay. And we played in the fields. We'd go into the field house and pick up basketball games with the college kids. So that was all kind of our domain and really important in our growing up. And of course Crystal Street, because it was the hub of shopping, and it wasn't an entertainment street like it is now. You know, you had a diner maybe, but it was where you went to shop. And my parents had a store there. My grandparents had a store there, which I'll talk about a little bit later.
Nice. So you didn't necessarily spend a ton of time in the public parks as you were growing up, but baseball was a big part of your life, right?
Yeah, and we'll get in a little bit about me moving back and forth, but I started here the summer before 6th grade, and I was a bit of a late bloomer, and relative to today where kids start playing at 4 and 5 years old, I really didn't start till I was 10 or 11. So by the time I came here, I had tried out for Little League, but was put in the Day League. And I'm using these terms because the old timers will know what I mean. So the Day League played at the Little League field, which is just up the Levee Loop. And I played one season there until I aged out and had to go into the Teener League, which was the 13 through 16, 15 or 16. And that was the transition from the 60-foot bases to the 90-foot bases. So from there, we played at Dansbury Field or at Stroudsburg Field. And I mean, those were really the only two parks around at the time. So it had to be one or the other.
So at some point then you left the area. Where did life take you?
Very long story, which I will spare everyone the gory details. But the short of the story is I moved to Miami, Florida. I graduated Eastburg in 78, went to 2 years of community college in Williamsport, Pennsylvania for auto mechanics. And then I had some friends, family friends, who were moving to Miami, Florida. And they called up and said, "Hey, we're going, you want to come?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds like an adventure." So I ended up in Miami for a couple of years, and then from there moved to Orlando. Had my family, raised my son was born and raised in Orlando. I was there for about 24 years, and then had a job opportunity in Mooresville, North Carolina, and moved there in 2006 and was there for 16 years. And
then something brought you back?
Yes, something brought me back. I got to a point in life where I could be where I wanted to be, and I concluded that I really didn't have any reason to be anywhere else. I didn't really enjoy living in the South very much, and I had the luxury of choosing where I wanted to go, and strangely enough, I said I want to come home. I always tried to learn the history of any place I lived and find out how it got to where it is in that day. And it was always interesting, but I never felt like it was my history. You know, I could listen to old timers saying, "Oh yeah, I remember this, I remember that. Wasn't it great when?" And I enjoyed that, but I always felt left out. And I remember thinking a few times, "Oh, I wish I had that." And then I thought, "Wait a minute, I do have that. And why am I depriving myself of that enjoyment?" And so I think that had a lot to do with it. Plus, there's still family and friends nearby that important.
So would you say that East Stroudsburg was still home? Even though you were...
Always.
Yeah.
No matter where I was, when it was, through my whole life. So where are you from? It was always, little town, Poconos. Oh, I know the Pocono. Yeah, well, oh yeah. So always, never said anything different.
So what was it like to return after that time and see how the town had changed?
Well, my dad lived here all his life, and so it was never like large pieces of time that I wasn't here. We would come up once or twice a year, pretty much every year. So nothing was a big shocker to me because I'd seen it evolve over time. But while my brain will say, yes, things have changed, and a lot of people will say things have changed, I don't really see it that way. I still think of it as very much the same place. Places are, where they've always been. Buildings are where they've always been. You drive around the way you've always driven around. You get to want to go here. It's the same way I've always gone. So yeah, some personality has changed, but I don't see it as much of a change. I still see it very much the same place, which is maybe I'm making myself to feel comfortable, but I don't think I am. I think it is.
Yeah. Would you say that your perspective changed at all on East Stroudsburg?
No, not really. People have moved away, and I had a saying that when I used to be someone in this town, right? that my family was known and I was known, and the connections were a little bit tighter, but I don't think it really has changed very much because I've set out to engage in the community and become a part of things, and I've had that chance, and there's been nothing that has kept me from achieving those objectives as I've come along. And I think that this is a perfect example that
Yeah.
that my history and my place in the world has some meaning, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of being known in town, your grandfather is honored with a plaque right here at Dansbury Park. Can you tell us a little bit about who he was and what that means to your family?
Another story that you wouldn't know, but actually, Koster is not our family name. My dad was born Albert Wolf in Brooklyn, New York in 1930. And his father died when my dad was very young. And so my grandmother and my dad moved in with cousins, relatives there in Brooklyn, and were there for quite a while. But eventually my grandmother was introduced to a family friend named Leon J. Koster, who was already, by the mid-30s or early 30s, a established business person here in East Stroudsburg. So they eventually got married. They got married in April of 1938 and moved my grandmother and my dad here to town. As a matter of fact, their first place they lived was the big white fraternity house at the top of Antelope Street at Smith Street. Mm-hmm. They had an apartment there that they lived in from 1938 till 1941. When they bought the house on East Brown Street where we lived where it was in our family for 45 years. But along the way, Leon Koster adopted my dad, and thus we have the name Koster. And we don't have any real connection to any other Kosters, but that will be the name my son takes on with him, and who knows how far that goes. But he was a very active civic leader. His obituary shows that he was in Lions Club and did a lot of other activities, including, I have it in my notes here, I want to make sure I say it properly, president of the East Stroudsburg Playground Recreation Committee. And what years that was, I really don't know, but probably through the 40s or 50s. But yeah, he died in August 6th, 1961. So he knew me, but I didn't know him.
Yeah, yeah. But you can see his plaque right there next to the pool.
I do.
Excellent. Does that legacy shape how you look at the parks at all?
It really does, because I've always known it was there. It was always a source of pride for us to be able to walk past that and see our name on it. I don't think a lot of people could say that. Maybe I've made more of it than it needed to be, but I enjoyed that. And even today, if we've got family or friends that come into town, I always make sure that we walk by there and show that, there's a connection to that. So yeah, it was always a source of pride that someone in my family had something to do with what was going on here, and made it something enough where he got that kind of recognition. So yeah, it's a big source of pride.
Yeah. And right nearby that is the levee, of course.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the levee. You have told me that as a kid, it kind of felt like the levee was off limits, or maybe even a scary feature. What do you remember about it?
Well, keep in mind, I'm a little kid, and it's a very tall, steep mountain there.
Yeah.
And I learned at an early age why it was there. And so I think there was a sense of danger on the other side, right? I didn't know if that was something that happened all the time or not, or whether it was, or what was even over there. Maybe in my mind I knew, but the perception was that it was dangerous. Mm-hmm. And remember, it wasn't set up for access at the time. It was just a mountain that, I'm sure at some point my parents told me, don't go over there, mainly because they didn't want me to get lost and not know where I was. So, yeah, it was always very much off limits and daunting.
And now it's home to the Levee Loop Trail. Very intentionally has access to a 4.5-mile recreational loop trail. So what's it like for you to walk on that trail now?
It's just a great resource. I never thought of doing something like that. And so, yeah, I enjoy it. I use it, fairly often, and enjoy that as a place to either bring people who are out of town or just to get my own walk or bike ride in.
Do you have a favorite piece of the Levee Loop?
Yes. And I thought, I didn't realize this. I thought about this in the past, and then it wasn't until you asked the question that I really had to put it into words. But to leave the trailhead here and just go maybe a couple hundred yards north, there's a place where you can stop. And I call it perfectly Poconos, because you can turn 360 and you see the hillside, the Foxtown Hill or Godfrey Ridge to the south. And you have the creek, which is such an important geological, historical part of the Poconos. You look across and you've got the commerce of the Stroudsburg Flats. You look ahead, you see wooded areas and nature and birds and foxes and snakes and all the things that we've seen as we walk along. And then over on this side, you've got the quiet, traditional neighborhood of the East Stroudsburg Flats. And I just think that spot, taking that turn, it encompasses so much of what Poconos is about. And no matter what time of year, you're going to get a different view of that, and it's still going to encompass, this is what we have, this is how we live, and what it's like to be here. So I think that's as good a spot as any in the whole place.
That's fantastic. It's actually, when we take marketing photos for the Levee, that's just about where I usually stand to take a good photo for the Levee.
It sums it up.
Yeah. So before the Levee Loop became this place that we can use for recreation, it was built in response to a crisis. In August 1955, back-to-back hurricanes dumped more than a foot of rain on the Poconos. So the Broadhead Creek and the McMichael Creek overflowed, and they destroyed homes and properties, and they completely changed the landscape of the region. And this year, again, marks the 70th anniversary of that flood. So David, your father was here, and he had his camera with him. And he helped to document the destruction in the wake of that flooding. What did you hear about the flood growing up?
There were a lot of stories that were told, not just by my family, but I think within the whole community, it was still fresh and it was still affecting life, not in an obvious way, but I just think that it was seared into the consciousness in a way. Yeah, I heard stories, and I just made a couple of notes that as far as my family directly, we were not impacted, not we because I wasn't born then, but my grandparents and my dad lived on East Brown Street, which is up the hill, so it was not affected directly. However, my grandfather owned a store, and I'll give a little detail on that. I said he was a business person going back into the 30s. He had a place called Koster's Variety Store, which most old-timers will remember, and that's one of the ways that I was known, is when I give my name, oh yeah, I knew your grandparents' store or your grandparents. But originally his store was on the corner of Washington and Crystal in the Henry Building, 1 Washington Street. And then in early 40s, he moved to 57 Crystal Street across from the depot where Tony's Pizza is right now. So the store was there for 35 years, almost 33 years. So I say that because the story I always heard that has confirmed recently by my mom is that in the aftermath, my grandfather went and opened the store and just told people, come in, take whatever you need. And, you know, that was his contribution. My mom tells the story about, well, she was not quite 18 and was working at a place called Barrow Lodge in Bushkill. And while my parents were not married, they were engaged. They got married in November. This happened in August. And so a couple days before, my mom had traveled from Bushkill to spend a couple days at the family house to visit and to spend the time. Well, she was there when the flood hit, but couldn't go back to Bushkill because the roads and the bridges were knocked out. Now, she will say to this day, you know, as a 17-year-old who wanted to be with her fiancé, that wasn't the worst thing that could happen. Selfishly put, in her words, it wasn't the worst thing that could happen. So she tells that story. Another story I remember hearing very often is we had family friends that lived in a house where the Burger King is right now on Lincoln Avenue. And it was a double house, and it was Mrs. Libfeld, Rebecca Libfeld, who operated a little grocery store on the bottom floor of this house. And she was there when the waters came in, and she ended up riding it out on the roof. So and she was an old lady. Yeah. So we heard that story a lot. And in addition to the pictures my dad took and the newspaper articles that he saved and things like that.
What parts of the community would you say were hit the hardest?
Any place that was by the water. So you had the Pocono Creek, which washed out the flood, or the bridge by over in Stroudsburg where the Wawa is, next to the Wawa. The McMichaels Creek, so Ann Street and Lower Main, and then anything along the Broadhead, Antelomic, the East Stroudsburg Flats, Lincoln Avenue, all the way down to Minnesink and Shawnee were really devastated. That's just in our area. Of course, this went way up into the Delaware Valley and up into the Poconos.
Yeah. And your father was a photographer who documented the aftermath?
At the time, he was 25 years old. He had recently come back to the area from the Army, where he spent a year or so in Alaska. And that's really where he got the bug to start taking pictures because of the natural beauty in Alaska. And so he was still a hobbyist at the time, but he was starting to really understand the place in history. He had a good eye for not only the visual aspects of photography, but also capturing moments in time. And so, yeah, he got a camera, and don't know what camera it was, but he ventured out from the house and went down into town and took pictures. But he also had the foresight of renting an airplane and taking aerial shots throughout the two boroughs. And probably the smartest thing he did at the time was he took them in color, which is very rare to have color pictures, but his are.
Yeah.
And those pictures, those original slides, still exist, along with other artifacts that he's kept, and they're now in the collection of the Monroe County Historical Association.
And you have some with you today.
I do.
So we're going to take a look at a couple of them.
Okay.
For our audio-only listeners, you might want to switch over to our video format, and we'll have the pictures up on the video for you as well.
So this first, you want me to talk?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so this first picture shows the area right at where 5th Street blends into 447, just south of Antelope. And you've probably heard the story of Camp Davis. And this shows that plot of land along the Broadhead Creek, which was known as Camp Davis, but I always make the point of saying that it really wasn't a camp. When you think of kids coming, it was more of a family vacation spot, and with houses and cabins and cottages and so on. But the original path of the creek bowed to the west right before that plot of land, and with the amount of water that was coming down, the water did not make the bend and just crashed right through that plot of land, taking out the bridge and a good part of the railroad bed. So what you don't see in this picture is the mitigation that took place afterwards, which is straightening of the creek along this stretch. The next slide is of the Pine Brook Park area, just south of the first picture, and it shows the creek going through that section where it knocked out the bridge on 5th Street. It shows the little half moon of cabins that are kind of part of Pine Brook Camp that are still there, so it gives you a perspective. But what is important to understand, kind of the effects of the long-term effects of the flood and how it impacted what we're doing now, especially around the Parks and Recreation, is that this picture is showing where Pine Brook Park is now, because again, the creek was straightened through there and moved eastward right along the existing railroad line. So without that, Pine Brook Park would not exist. But I often like to tell people that if you do walk the trails in Pine Brook Park and you go over those little wooden footbridges under some babbling brooks, take note that you're actually walking over the original path of the Broadhead Creek. This picture shows the East Stroudsburg flats in the fore, and then just a little corner of the Stroudsburg flats in the lower right. And anywhere you see brown is where the water came in. And again, for those of you that are new to the area, this was pre-levee. And so if you ever been, what did they call that area on the north of Yetter, right by the bridge, where the rocks and stuff are? Where do people walk out?
People call it the beach when they talk to me.
Okay, well, so you get a sense of what the whole area was like without the levees there. It was just beach, right? And a gradual rise into the neighborhoods. So there was nothing to hold the water back when it came in. And this picture really shows how far the water came in into what we consider the flats now, and the park is in the center, basically the center right of the picture. You can see the pool if you look closely. But this part of town was devastated pretty badly. And this picture showing from right next to the community center on Day Street, looking straight into the pool house. So really, if you look at the picture of today, or you stand there today, it's really very much the same view, but it shows how the water came in, and as days later is still pooled in the field, and the cars that got washed down and deposited.
We'd be sitting in one heck of a puddle right now.
Yeah, it would be pretty wet. But and there's another picture really from more looking onto the Stroudsburg flats with the East Stroudsburg playground in the bit of the background. And again, you can see the brown, which is the indication that that was underwater. And this picture is a little farther south. And if you look very closely, right dead center of the picture, you can see the structure of what was then the State Bridge or the Interborough Bridge, which did not arch over the creek. Mm-hmm. Then it was flat across. So when you came down Washington Street, you just went straight across onto Lower Main or McConnell Street. And this shows how the bridge was completely knocked off its footing and sent down the creek. In addition, you can see the brown by the where the outlet of the McMichaels Creek comes in, and where the water treatment plant is still today. But then you also see, let me see yeah. And then you can also see to the right the Lincoln Avenue area, which a lot of people don't realize that at the time of the flood it was 95% residential, and a lot of houses were taken away. And because of that destruction, it never was rebuilt, but it became the commercial center that it is now. And I love this picture that I found in the Daily Record from July of 1956. And this shows in the center my dad sitting with a group of young people from the, can you read what that?
The American Friends Service Committee.
Right, who were in town sometime later after the flood to help renovate and repair the park. And my dad was asked to present these same slides that I just showed you, in addition to additional ones, to this group of people. So it's a really cool full circle thing for me to see this picture and have him sitting there showing these pictures, and I get to do the same thing 69 years later. And then we were talking about my grandfather earlier. Here's his obituary from the Daily Record, August 7th, 1961, and it speaks very kindly of his involvement in the community, including a mention of me and my brother. So, and then here is a picture also from the Daily Record, August 15th, 1963. My grandmother and local dignitaries, including the mayor of East Stroudsburg, at the dedication to the plaque and the planting of the tree that still stands. So I'll just say, for anyone who isn't sure, wants to look for the plaque and isn't sure where to look, if you're walking up the sidewalk, up the side approach to the pool house, rather than the front straight in the door, there's the slate steps that go up. If you go about halfway up, there's a big tree on the right-hand side, and just underneath the tree is the plaque that was dedicated 62 years ago. And that's it.
Nice. It's a neat spot. So it's powerful to think about how the levee and places like Pine Brook Park, and now the trail that's become in place, grew from the absolute destruction of this flood. Do you think that transformation is part of the identity of the community, or what makes it strong?
Well, it's an interesting question, because in the time, those mitigation steps, meaning the building of the levee, straightening of the creek, were controversial even then. So not to say that everyone was against it, but it had its pros and cons. Mm-hmm. And most were imposed by the state or the Army Corps of Engineers, and weren't necessarily local decisions that people got behind. So in that regard, that wasn't what I would call a community effort. But in what I've read, and I've had the chance to talk to people who were around and aware of the time, that the aftermath really brought out a lot of neighbors helping neighbors.
People opening their shops.
Yeah, opening the shops, but also just because people lived here together for a long time. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't as transient as it might be now. And so people knew each other and were friends. And so, there was a lot of working together for the cleanup, a lot of people contributing, donating time and effort and equipment and resources and helping get the place put back together. So I think in that regard, you can hear a lot of stories of the community coming together for the common good, for sure.
And as they've moved beyond and those mitigation strategies were put in place to serve a really practical purpose, the parks serve that purpose themselves too. So places like Pine Brook Park, Dansbury Park, if we were to get those flooding events in an extreme storm, those parks can still help to absorb any excess water, slow the flooding down, and reduce the damage. And I don't know if most people realize that that's one of the benefits of having parks in our environmental systems.
I don't think they do. I think unless you really make an effort to learn it and understand it, or at least observe what the potentials could be, I don't know that those are well-known stories and well-known bit of history to the average person who wasn't around or doesn't have the connection to that. It may just be, well, that's the way it always is. That's the way it is. That's the way nature made it. So I think I would be surprised if a large amount of people really understood that.
Yeah. So looking around at, how different, or in some cases not different, East Stroudsburg is there anything that surprises you?
The fundamentals, what surprises me that it hasn't changed that much.
Okay.
The fundamentals are very much the same, as I mentioned earlier. And I think in that regard, it's still a small town, and I think people, even though people that come here maybe come from a larger area, I think it becomes a small town for them too. And so no, not a lot of surprises to me. I think the one thing that I'm most surprised by is how big the high school got. I'm still amazed by that. Where did that come from? Why I guess they need it. But yeah, that's the one thing that I look at in this whole area. I think that's the one thing that I still can't quite get my arms around.
And we have a postcard too here, another one of your dad's colored photos. It's a really neat image of the high school.
Yeah.
We'll share that one as well.
That was what it looked like when I was a student there.
Yeah.
Very small and cozy, homey.
So speaking of school students, if you could leave a message for the next generation of East Stroudsburg residents or students, what would it be?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'm going to read this one because
Absolutely.
I want it to come out just exactly how I mean it. I would say, it's your town now. Remember what and who came before you and try to honor and value them. But it's up to you to make it a place where you will look back in your old age and be proud to say you came from here.
I don't think you could say anything more than that.
I won't.
Really?
I will not.
Very well, perfect. So thank you, David Koster, for joining us and helping us reflect on how much a place can hold. Family, memory, history, and hope. From baseball fields to floodwaters, from daunting levees to vibrant trails, the Stroud region has grown through challenge and change. It's also a reminder that our parks are more than green space. They hold our stories and they hold stormwater. They are places of play and protection, resilience, and restoration. To support our local parks, become a member of the Friends of Stroud Region Open Space and Recreation Commission. You can find more information at stroudrec.org/friends. This episode is part of the Voices of Our Landscape series for Monroe County's celebration of America250, leading up to the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. As part of that celebration, we invite you to join in the 250 for 250 Mile Challenge. Walk, bike, or paddle your way through Monroe County's parks and log 250 miles by July 4th, 2026 to honor our past and celebrate our shared future. David here has already tallied quite a few miles, and we hope that you'll join in. Learn more at stroudrec.org and be sure to subscribe to Parkside Podcast wherever you listen. Until next time, go outside and play.